Again, and welcome back. It is 2:30. So I have the great pleasure of introducing our final act of the day. Our final session today is going to be a live, open, and casual discussion where we hope to tie in all the components of marine mammal response presented today together and answer as many questions as possible that have materialized throughout the day. So if you have a question, the Q&A box is the best place for it. My good friend David Prater is going to be going through the Q&A and asking questions to our moderator of this section, Don Noviello from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And together they're going to be working through those questions. Don might be passing off answers to folks in our panelist group. So if you are one of our panelists and you are asked to answer a question, please unmute yourself and turn on your video if you have the bandwidth for it. Understandable if you don't, but be nice to see some faces. And so that's kind of how that is going to work out. If you have a question you would like to ask out loud and you're one of our attendees, please raise your hand and we will attempt to call on you and unmute you as we can. Yeah, so hopefully you guys are all, if you are a panelist, you are able to unmute yourself and turn on your video as needed. And I think those were the main points I was supposed to hit. So David and Don, you guys are ready to go.
Good day, everyone. Yeah. So David, we have first question.
Yes, thanks, Don. So again, my name is David Prater. I'm with the Department of Ecology's Spills Program. And the hope was that we would first kind of start out with addressing the questions that came in throughout the bulk of today's workshop. For those of you that typed in the questions, we wanted to be sure that the questions were answered. So I'll start by reading those questions out loud for our panelists to respond to. And the first few questions looks like are regarding the presentation from earlier this morning from Randall Davis. So first off, what percentage of IWR staff is paid by IWR and what percentage is volunteer?
Randall, are you on and do you want to just take that?
Working on seeing if we can get him on.
Okay.
Well,
we can move to.
Yeah. Let's see. The second question is a bit more general, and this is for any panelist, but Kathleen asks, would response boats pick up any marine mammal they would see or only sea otters during an oil response?
Okay, during oil spill response. Response boats will pick up, okay, I want to go to, it depends on what response boats you're talking about. There'll be boats out there doing oil spill collection and tending booms and things like that. They are probably not going to pick up marine mammals. We would be fielding specific boats for search and collection for sea otters, for sure, and potentially NOAA will be putting out other boats for other marine mammals, seals, harbor seals, whatever. So it depends on what the assignment of the boat is.
Great, thanks, Don. The next question came in later in the afternoon, and this is for Erin Gless if she's online. Kristen Donald wants to know what you are doing with the data that came in, that comes in when you're collecting the information on orcas and boat presence.
I'm assuming you mean in our app that we're using. That's for all species, so we do it anytime we're on scene. Right now, it's just kind of for internal purposes. We use that to kind of help spread out our fleet, keep an eye on, how many vessels are watching one particular group of whales. If there's, already 3 boats there, maybe another boat will, go look at some seals or something until, space opens up. But it's nice to have, but right now we're mostly just using it for kind of internal purposes. But yeah.
Great, thank you very much. This next one, or next few are pertaining to the response in Uruguay. So Dr. Mearns, if you're online, question for you. So Madison asks that during your presentation, you mentioned dead seal pups specifically. Did the pups die at a higher rate compared to adults? And if so, was that suspected to be due to biophysical difference?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't have any data on that, other than that, there were thousands and thousands of pups that died versus 100 or a little bit more of the adults. So, by the time we got there, it had been many hot days. The pups are smaller. They were basically they were cooking to death with the oil coatings on them. What was the last part of that question?
If it was perhaps due to any biophysical difference between adult and amateur pups.
Yeah, I don't know. Just basic physiology would say that the smaller sized pups were cooking a lot more than the more protected adults.
Great, thank you. And a few follow-up questions to that. Do you know of any survival rates of more recent oil spill rehabilitation efforts and how those compared to the response that you spoke of earlier?
Is Mike Zaccardi on? I know he's OWCN and they've done research on that. I think he might like to address that. There you are, Mike. Please go ahead.
I'm happy to address it. It's a great question, and it's a question that we get all the time when it relates to oiled wildlife response and rehabilitation. There are so many different variables that go into survivability of spills. Those things we can't control. So time of year, product, condition, the weather, etc. Species that are impacted, but there are some things that we can control as far as speed of response, readiness, the preparedness levels as well. So it really does depend a lot. Some of the more recent results that we've seen, penguins, African penguins, there's been a lot of work done in those, and they seem to be comparable, post-release survival, comparable to normal. In other work, we did some work looking at surf scoters after the Casca Busan here in California, and there was a significant decline in survivability on that. So it really does depend. One of the things we tend to say is that for larger incidents, massive, so 1,000 birds incidents, you're usually looking at, in a best case scenario, on an average species, maybe about 50%. But that's applying newer techniques, newer rehabilitation protocols, and really getting out there and getting those animals quickly and into purpose-built facilities. I'm happy to put a link in the chat for a paper that Laird Hinkle and I wrote back in 2018 that does give a bit more of the references on that, though.
Great,
Thanks, Dr. Scotty. I think everybody should just know that the numbers have been improving over the decades, but the more knowledge that people at OWCN and elsewhere are getting, it's really a vast improvement. What's next there, David?
All right. So this next couple questions are for Kristen Wilkinson, if you're still around. The first one is, what is the minimum overflight distance for marine mammals in the United States?
Well, that probably depends on the type of aircraft. So it's different from helicopters to small planes for drones. And I'll look up those different heights and put those in the chat box for you.
Great, thanks. And one more question for you. What are the requirements for interested or available parties to qualify to deploy Okami pipes per the Northwest Area Plan for, this is multiple parts, for A, HAZWOPER training level, ICS training, or safe and effective use of the pipes? And lastly, via what vessels, either based on seaworthiness or other factors, qualifies for the job?
This might actually be a better question for Don, because I know Don has been out on the water many times with some of the groups that would be deploying these pipes during some of those training exercises. So Don, I don't know if you want to take a stab at that one.
Sure. Yeah, the vessel's got to be, okay, the training requirements. We hope to do all of our deterrence work outside what's called the red zone, or where the oil actually is, because the whole idea is to keep the whales away from the spill. If you're far enough away, the groups in the boats will not need HAZWOPER training. It's only if you go into the oil spill that you need HAZWOPER training. As far as the kind of boats, it depends on the sea state. We've done drills in the past where we've used everything from small 17-foot boats to larger yachts. Obviously, a small boat in bad weather would be unsafe. So we're generally looking for boats more in a 25-foot range with higher size, better. And there are some standards being established for that. And if you want to volunteer to do that, then I would go to the Oil Spills 101 site and sign up for that as a potential. Are there more parts to that question, David, that I should address?
No, I think you addressed the bulk of it. Thanks. And I would reiterate that oilspills101.wa.gov website does have a lot of information on how people can get involved. The next few questions are to the more general panelists, meaning all the panelists. See, first here from Oil Spill Limited. From outside the US West Coast, for response planning and operations, are there any studies that guide and compare the effects of untreated oil versus dispersed oil on the various classes and species of marine mammals? And follow up, where have trustees come down on the use of dispersants in areas of known marine mammal populations and habitats?
Is Gary Shigenaka happen to be on? Or Alan, yeah. Do you want to take a stab at that, Dr. Mears?
No, I want to grab Gary. Where is he? He did the ultimate experiments.
Wait.
But I don't.
There he is.
I thought I was going to skate out of this. So please repeat the question.
Yes. So from outside the US West Coast, this one comes from Oil Spill Limited. The question is, for response planning and operations, are there any studies that guide and compare the effects of untreated oil versus dispersed oil on the various classes and species of marine mammals?
Well, you know, I think somewhere on the Oil Spill 101 website, my talk is posted. And it just discusses a very narrow slice of that pie, and it has to do with the effects of oil and dispersed oil, as well as dispersants alone, on the physical performance of whale baleen. So in terms of how oil and dispersants and dispersed oil are considered toxicologically, I'd be happy to pass it off to somebody like Tracy Collier, who has done a lot of work on that particular subject. So we can just continue handing the baton down the line here.
Very good. Thank you, Gary.
Well, I was sure I was going to skate out of here too, Gary. I mean, after Deepwater Horizon, there was just a ton of work done on dispersants and the various effects. A lot of lab work, a lot of lab studies. Basically, though, it still comes down to the basic trade-off. Do you want to keep the oil off the surface and off the shoreline? And how's that going to affect marine mammals that are obviously very important residents of the shorelines and the surface area? And we really don't have great answers because you just can't do the controlled studies in marine mammals. We know a lot more about fish and what dispersant and dispersed oil do to fish. We really don't have a lot about marine mammals. I think one of the big questions coming out of the Deepwater Horizon is what are the volatilization of compounds coming off of oil on the surface with or without dispersants, because we think that that's probably one of the main ways, at least for cetaceans. I'm not speaking about pinnipeds or sea otters, but at least for cetaceans, one of the main routes of exposure that we're most concerned about is inhalation or aspiration.
So you're suggesting that if the dispersants reduce the amount of volatiles that come off, that would help with marine mammals that are breathing in that zone?
Yeah, potentially it could. And I'm sure somebody probably has done some studies looking at what's in a dispersant treated slick in the air, or I should say they should have. We were amazed how little we knew about what was in the air right above an oil spill during Deepwater Horizon. We were surprised that there wasn't more known.
Thank you. All right, so David, what's next?
Yes, so again, for all the panelists, is there a difference between how diesel and other types of oil spills interact in the marine environment, horizontally and vertically, each of their impact to a species, and how responders handle cleaning and rehabbing of the animals? Do these, does the response vary depending on the type of fuel?
Okay, that's a complex question. I think the answer is yes. Response does depend on the type of fuel, whether gasolines, light refined products have more of the volatile parts. Crude oils, heavy fuel oils will have more of the waxy, sticky parts that affect fur and feathers more than respiratory membranes. So that alone will change how it's reacted to.
Great, thanks, Don. Anyone else from the panel want to chime in?
Yeah, this is Randall Davis. In our experience, crude oil, especially, for example, crude oil, which is a very complex mixture of hydrocarbons, including some very volatile, very dangerous hydrocarbons, is a bigger challenge in terms of toxicity. But only for the first a week or so. And after it begins to weather, what's left behind are the less dangerous long chain hydrocarbons, as Don was saying. We responded to a spill in the Aleutian Islands involving bunker C fuel oil. And our impression overall is that its lethality was not as great as a crude oil, in part because it disperses perhaps a little faster and weathers perhaps a little bit faster. But I can tell you, crude oil, when it first enters the water, is a very dangerous material that has a lot of toxicity. But that only lasts for a week or two, and then it becomes less lethal.
Thank you, Dr. Davis.
Great. And Dr. Davis, while I have you on the line, a few questions came in specific to your presentation. First off, what percentage of IWR staff is paid by IWR and what percentage is volunteer?
IWR only has a very small staff of maybe 5 people that are paid through our retainer with Alyeska Pipeline Service Company. None of our staff work on this full time. We're either professors at universities, we're veterinarians, we're veterinary technicians, but we have the experience to come together and respond if the need is there. And we are under retainer to Alyeska Pipeline Service Company to respond in 24 hours, 7 days a week. So that's our obligation, but it's not what we do on a day-to-day basis. We have the knowledge and expertise to scale up, and that's our flexibility and versatility. And part of that is through a roster of about 200 trained responders who are OSHA certified and have said they would make themselves available in Alaska if there were a spill. Now, of those individuals, how many could respond at any one time and give up their day-to-day obligations? Only a fraction. But nevertheless, we feel we have the capability of a core response with our basic vets, vet techs, and Terry and myself, and a core of maybe 30 or 40 other responders to man the rehab facility in Valdez within 72 hours. That's our obligation. And each situation, I mean, the situation in Washington State will be handled differently, but the requirement in Alaska under law is that Alyeska must respond with a operational 200 otter rehabilitation facility in 72 hours, and capture vessels has to be out picking up otters within the same period of time. And so that's the scenario. And we train each year and what have you, but nevertheless, it's not what we do day in and day out. It's what we do if the need arises. And so, in fact, the core team is relatively small, but the ability to ramp up quickly is good. I think we have what we need for a big spill if it were necessary.
Thanks. And that's you're reiterating, that's in Alaska. You have
Yes.
some permit, you have your letter of authorization here in Washington, but we don't have a facility for you at this time.
That's right. IWR doesn't own facilities. We advise the oil industry and state and federal trustees on what they need to do to build a facility or put the facility together, what the requirements are, and we are willing to train and staff it if they wish, but we don't own any facilities per se. That's up to the industry. Typically, in Alaska, in Washington State, you have no obligations, legal obligations, my understanding, for the industry. So it falls to the state and federal trustees. And I think that's what Dawn is trying to organize. But we can organize it and manage it, but we don't own it.
Thanks. As far as Linda or as far as talking about state standards now, I mean, we don't have a 72-hour requirement like Dr. Davis was talking about in Alaska, but your new regulation is going to call for some new standards, right?
Yes, that's right. And that was the impetus to have this workshop, actually, because we're in the nearing the final phase of implementing brand new regulations that have really updated and improved, enhanced the wildlife response standards that we had in place for maybe 10 years. So there are new obligations for the industry plan holders to be able to put together the equipment, the facilities, and the people side to manage oiled wildlife response. And the final phase that we're getting into right now has to do with mammals in particular. So as part of our, process towards getting to compliance, we wanted to have this workshop to help everybody kind of get educated in the best practices and the facilities that are out there and the regulatory framework around it. So we do not have a timing standard at this point, similar to what you're talking about. But the people, the equipment, and the processes and the commitments and the plans now will have to be there.
Yeah, our recommendation was based on our experience in 1989, where we had nothing, no people, no facilities, no plan. And of the 320 otters we picked up in 1989, 100 died. And almost all of those were in the first week when the oil was most toxic, most lethal, when we had the least capability to handle the otters that were coming in. And it was apparent that if you're going to have a successful spill, you need to be able to respond relatively quickly. And you can play with the numbers. It came down to 72 hours for Alaska, but that's not a hard number. But nevertheless, the sooner you can get out there, the more successful you will be.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Davis.
All right, and Dr. Davis, two more questions regarding IWR. The first, does IWR include Canadians on their roster of trained participants? And the second question is, how is IWR funded and how are costs recovered for the rehabilitation centers?
I'm sorry, what was the first question again?
Does IWR include Canadians on their roster of trained participants?
We would never include Canadians, heaven forbid. Now we draw the line there. I'm sorry. Of course, we include any Canadians that want to join us. And interestingly, I'll tell you, in the first week and a half of the Valdez oil spill, we sent 5 oiled sea otters to the Vancouver Aquarium. And you should have heard the howls and the controversy of sending Alaska sea otters to Canada for care and treatment. I mean, it was really quite an amazingly silly situation. But so we have a contract with Alaska Service Company, a retainer that we are obliged to respond in 24 hours or 7 days a week to a spill in Prince William Sound. That's our contract. And that's just a retainer. And then for training, oil spill drills, we're paid above and beyond that on a contract hourly basis. And if we respond to a spill, that's also an hourly basis in our contract with Alaska Pipeline Service Company. It's very straightforward. If we're not working for Alaska, we're not getting a lot of money, but we're there to respond if they're needed. And then our contract kicks in with a very clear salary scale for the upper management, the veterinarians, the vet techs, the volunteers, it's all been pre-negotiated. We did have a small spill in 2007 that we responded to. We've never had a major spill since 1989. So really, it's mostly contingency planning, training, and drills. And for that, as if Alyeska wants us to participate, we just are paid on an hourly basis. But I don't make my living doing oil spill response. I'm a professor at Texas A&M University, but I have the ability to make myself available if it's needed. And therefore IWR can keep their overhead relatively low, but still be responsive if the need arises. So that's the arrangement. And if other spill co-ops or industry people want to retain us to be available to help them on a 24/7 basis, we'll just negotiate a standard contract with them. It's not a mystery.
Thank you. So is there more for Dr. Davis, David?
That's it, specifically for you, Dr. Davis, so you're off the hook for now. 3 other questions came in for all panelists. The first here, has there been a determination of the cause of the marine mammal deaths during or after the 2020 MV Wakashio spill? And are there concerns specific to oil spills of low sulfur or very low sulfur marine fuels?
The detailed question. Anybody from NOAA want to jump in on that?
I can touch on it briefly.
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Zaccardi.
Pregnant pause. We were in contact with people that were doing necropsies on those marine mammals initially. I don't believe they had any definitive results on that as far as cause of death. But I think the question is still there, is still out there though. It's one of the challenges in marine mammal oil spills is there's not often a smoking gun related to impacts, especially internal impacts. It's a bit more difficult than the hypothermia and the increased metabolic rates in birds and animals like sea otters. So much more difficult in, especially in cetaceans, to try to diagnose that.
Thank you.
I can add something to that. In 1989, we did a lot of oiled otter necropsies, histology, and toxicology. And we were very fortunate that Exxon gave us kind of a blank check to pursue this. It was very expensive. And we were looking for the smoking gun, as Mike was saying. And we were very disappointed that we had a very hard time drawing a cause and effect relationship between the toxicology and the histopathology. And I think one thing you need to keep in mind is that mammals are very, very good at clearing hydrocarbons from their system. Their liver is very effective at clearing hydrocarbons out of the system. And as a result, the damage that you might find from histopathology might be residual after the hydrocarbons, polycyclic hydrocarbons and others have disappeared. And so it's very frustrating to try to draw such a direct line. And I mean, you just need to keep that in mind. You can spend a lot of money on toxicology, but you may not get as clear-cut of an answer as you might hope. And we also found that there was hepatic damage centrilobular, that ultimately the pathologist told us turned out to be a residual effect of hypoxic damage due to vasoconstriction and not the toxic effects of the oil. So you got to be really careful when you go into this. You need a really good pathologist. And Mike, I'm sure you have them, but it may not be as easy and clear cut as you might hope.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for those answers. Also, another general question for the panelists. What can be done to educate and use the local populations effectively during a spill response?
Let's see, I assume we're talking about local populations of people.
Yes,
Okay.
that's my assumption as well.
All right, well, this even goes to maybe even to your area, David, but people who are interested, we are actively reaching out to them. That's why you heard from people like Pacific Whale Watch, OrcaNet, the Hydrophone Network, and we put on these classes until the pandemic here, every year to train people who are interested in being wildlife volunteers. And Ecology, through their Oil Spills 101 website, disseminates that kind of information, and their site also has information you can look at if you're interested in that topic. Is there more you want to say on that, David?
This is Linda. I'm sorry, David. I would say that that's one of our primary goals here too, with the new regulation that we're trying to implement. And for those of you who have had drills here with us recently, you may have noticed that we're doing more to use the JIC and the liaison and the wildlife branch to really tailor our outreach and our messaging for the purpose of educating. And David, maybe you can add some more to that.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. So yeah, to reiterate what both Don and Linda said, Ecology, with the great help of Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and Focus Wildlife and the U.S. Coast Guard, facilitated training for oil wildlife volunteers. Usually, like Don said, twice a year, but because of the pandemic, it's been a little tricky. But we are about to announce within the next month registration for a virtual training that will happen on December 4th. And so I encourage everyone here that is interested to keep an eye on oilspills101.wa.gov for that announcement. And also I have on oilspills101.wa.gov on the workshop webpage, there is a recording presentation on oiled wildlife volunteer process within the Pacific Northwest, where I go into depth about how to register to be a volunteer, what volunteers may be asked to do during a spill response. And yeah, going back to the question, I think that's one of the things that can be done most readily to engage the public and greater communities.
Thanks, David. A little awkward pause here, but who's next then? What's the next one?
Sure. So the next one, again, for all the panelists, in the advanced planning and testing for responses to incidents, is a catalog of scenarios prepared to use as guidelines to expedite responses and be updated with lessons learned? Are examples available as learning tools for volunteers?
Wow, okay. Is there I want to say the answer is no, that we don't have an established list of specific scenarios. They are evolved through the planning process for the drills. And maybe Linda or Matt or anybody on the drill side would like to talk about that.
Yeah, I was gonna answer in the exact same way. So we develop scenarios, small and large, multiple times a year through multiple different companies, and in multiple locations through the drill program, and test things. And of course, the biggest test would be a worst case scenario, which the plan holders have once every 3 years. So I don't know if we put those out. I mean, if you want to have some scenarios, please just ask us and we can help with that. We can help give you the things that you need beyond a scenario that might support your training or a drill that you might be doing, things like trajectories and the scenario and some of the other documentation. So no one place where they're stored and publicly put out there that I know of.
Thanks, Linda.
We do it simply as a function of the number of otters involved. And we have a core team, and we have the ability to ramp up from 5 otters to 200. And that's in place, and we understand what's needed, and we have a plan to get from 5 to 200 in a reasonable period of time. And that doesn't mean you have all of the capability for 200 on site at any one time, but you have a minimum capability, but you have a plan to ramp up. And that usually means, for us in Alaska, a purchasing group.
Right, Director. I think the question was more about scenarios for the drills, how much oil's out there, what the thing is. Obviously, that will impact the sea otters if it's one on our outer coast. But your point is well taken.
Great, and those that marks the end of the list of questions that were typed in throughout the workshop. But I wanted to remind everyone that you during any time, please raise your hand with the raise hand function that you'll see on your screen somewhere on the workshop interface here. And if you have any other questions or follow-ups, let me know and I will try to go about unmuting you.
I have, this is odd, but I have a question, I think, for Kristen and Grace on the killer whale deterrence. We described a lot of stuff, but we didn't really go over the fact, well, maybe we did, but not as clearly as I'd like, that we have pre-approval for the United States Coast Guard under your permits to start deterrence activities right away, even before we can get a hold of you, although our high priority is to get a hold of you. Is that still true? Is that where we're still at?
Yes, I believe so. So out of our Office of Protected Resources at NOAA headquarters, they issue all of the co-investigator letters under the Marine Mammal Health and Stranding Response Program permit. I can certainly go back and see if we've got a letter on file that is still in place and follow back up with you to make sure you have a copy.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. And I saw a note from Elizabeth Petrus with Coast Guard that they have that, so that's good. So thank you, both of you, for that question. Anything else come in, David?
Yes, let's see. Kathleen Waldron, I'm going to unmute you here. Looks like your hand's raised.
I think we might have been doing the same thing at the same time there.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I was asking a question about the Santa Barbara spill because when I was looking at those citizens who were trying to help on the beach, clearing things up, grabbing birds, is there a way that you could use them at that time if you had some good education saying, this is what we need to have help with. This is what you can do. I mean, they are a good resource, but they need to be educated. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And regarding that specific incident in the volunteer capacity there, largely it was an error of unified command by not producing the information and warnings needed to educate those volunteers in time before they got out on the beaches and got into the oil. I think that unified command could have acted much more swiftly in giving them means to sign up and register as a volunteer, and also that spill provided a way for us in Washington and greater Northwest to develop and improve our own volunteer capabilities by doing these trainings before an incident happens. A lot of the volunteers that would likely show up to an incident would have that pre-knowledge of what to do, where to go, and how to do it safely.
Mike, it looks like you have like to make some comment on that.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question and a great point. The images that I showed of the public trying to save those animals, those actually happened within the first 24 hours, even before we had significant numbers of individuals out there. Having a plan and having boilerplate language that can go out immediately from some of the first press releases, having a hotline established, having messaging saying do not approach the animals, you can injure them, you can injure yourself. Some of the things that David was talking about, absolutely crucial from minute one. I mean, as I said, we have 1,600 responders in California, but we can't be there starting on the exact time where the oil hits the water. So having that messaging out there, letting people know that their assistance will be needed and there's a way to get them in, and that professionals will be there responding to those animals. And the best way you can do it is call this number and report it. It gives the public the right messaging, it keeps them safe, but it also allows the public, in essence, to do our initial reconnaissance to be able to find those animals. So all of that stuff, as Sarah said in our recording, you can never be too prepared, and especially finding a way for the public to be a participant as a spontaneous volunteer in an organized fashion if needed is a crucial part of that.
Thanks. All right, Dave, we got any more? Uh-oh, did we get locked off, David? I see.
Sorry.
There you go.
So I'm not seeing any more hands raised.
You got Dr. Marins who've had it with a hand raised.
Oh, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'm thinking about something that we used to do. The question of scenarios and drills and involving people of all types in them. Long time ago, NOAA with states co-sponsored a series of regional ecological risk assessment workshops. The focus on them was to get people to think through response strategies for responding to spills. That's no response, using dispersants, shoreline cleanup, mechanical cleanup, and so on. And the focus of those were on matrices that involved all levels of the ecosystem, from mammals and birds all the way down to infauna in sediments. And the whole idea was to get people to express their concerns and then to work together to say, well, this response might save air-breathing marine mammals at the surface from distress, but put dispersed oil in the water that could affect juvenile salmon that might be migrating through. What do you guys think about that? And we actually did this using um, numerical spill models. We would generate a spill that people wanted and show it. And then somebody would say, well, what if you disperse 30% of it? Then we'd run the model again and you'd see less oil at the surface, less oil on the shoreline, and more oil in the water column. Now what do we do? And so I haven't seen that kind of although I've retired 2 years now from NOAA, but I haven't seen that kind of a multi-day workshop ever happen again. It didn't solve any problems, but it got responders and stakeholders to understand where each group is coming from, and to think that through in a response. So this goes beyond marine mammals, but it includes marine mammals. And I guess I'd like to suggest folks looking back at some of the older literature on consensus ecological risk assessment workshops, and think about ways maybe of doing some of those again, at least in a specific region like Puget Sound or the Oregon coast or whatever. That's my thought.
Thanks, Dr. Mearns. Again, Linda may want to pop in on this. We haven't done a huge workshop like you're suggesting there, but the GRP process that the state has been doing tries to cover a lot of that ground as far as if there's a spill here, what's the most valuable, how do we protect from it, and involve us, stakeholders and citizens in that. Hi, David. I see that Dr. Mearns' screen is still up, but I don't see anybody else.
I have a question for the audience. Do we feel that we have the appropriate amount of wildlife response equipment at hand at any given time?
This is a question for the audience? No, for me.
This is for all panelists.
Okay. Anyone want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I can jump in, Don. I do keep a list of available resources that both include the gear needed, but also some of the expertise that we have available in the region. Some of those resource guides are specific to certain species like southern resident killer whales. Others are broader. There are lists, and Don, you can chime in here, of what would be needed for a pop-up rehabilitation facility, all the way down to who has cotter boards and hoop nets and transfer cages. And I'm sure that those resources could always be more plentiful, but we do have them compiled for Washington and Oregon in a centralized document for marine mammals specifically.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, I mean, we're always, there's always, we'd like to have more for a particular spill, but I think Kristen's answer is good for relative to marine mammals and what we've identified so far.
Great. Anyone else from the audience have anything that they'd like to ask the panelists? If so, raise your hand and I will unmute you.
Hey, David.
Yes.
Hey, I can't figure out how, oh, wait a minute. I think I just figured out how to raise my hand. I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand, but I just put something in the chat. So kind of following up on Dr. Mears' discussion. Oh.
Elizabeth, are you still there?
One of the things that we did during Refugio that we, oops, I'm still here.
Okay, sorry.
Here, hang on. That's okay. Oh, my internet connection is unstable. That's not good. So I was trying to follow up on what Dr. Mears was saying about ecological risk assessment. So we didn't do anything like that during refugia, but one thing we did do was we found black abalone in the intertidal, and black abalone is an endangered species. And so it solicited some really interesting conversation in the EU and the wildlife ops about, okay, so what can we do? What sort of facilities might we have? Where could we take them? And so luckily we didn't feel like it was necessary. We did some quick, pros and cons of removing them and decided that, we didn't need to remove them from the area, but it did lead to some good discussions between NIMS and Fish and Wildlife and Cal Fish and Wildlife and OSPR about what could we do and making sure that we were identifying those folks that could be involved. So it was a really great real-time exercise in doing some planning for something that we had never really thought about before. We talk a lot about marine mammals and birds, but we don't really talk about fish and invertebrates very much. So to the extent that that can be maybe thought about during exercise. It'd be real. We ended up doing a few, we were thinking about how we could do injects on that when we were doing some future exercises in California, add some random species that we don't normally see. And, how do we deal with this? Who do we call? Who do we know? So anyways, just a thought to share.
Thank you.
Let's see, we have one more coming in here. All right, so a few more general questions that are more scenario based for the panelists, based around a fictitious a spill that may occur. So regarding the mobile response units that we have in place in the Pacific Northwest, how long would it take to set up a mobile response unit? And they are mobile, but how mobile are they? Can they be transported by boat or plane per se?
Is anybody from NRC or one of the OSROs that has those want to talk about that? If you're on. It didn't
Don, I can get it if they're not.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
Yeah, currently they're all trailer based, semi-trailer based, so they can be anywhere in the state and set up. So the equipment is currently owned by the primary response contractors, and it's primarily all semi-based, with the exception of Focus Wildlife and Anacortes. But the rule of thumb is that it can be anywhere in the state and deployed within 24 hours.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Another question here. So regarding the treating and rehab of otters, do we know much more than we did 30 years ago? And if so, what's the biggest difference in treatment between now and then?
As Dr. Davis or Dr. Zaccardi still on, do they want to address that one?
Our treatment protocols are pretty much the same as they were in the 1990s. There's been some small considerations of improvements involving water temperature during washing, but the protocol per se hasn't really changed in terms of the washing. It's pretty straightforward. Our understanding of the effects of oil has probably improved somewhat, but our ability to learn about the effects of oil depends on these spill events. And much of what we know now, to a large extent, there's other information, did come from the 1989 spill, and a lot of publications came out of it. There haven't been a lot of histopathology, toxicology reports that I'm aware of on sea otters recently, but that's where a lot of our knowledge still lies. And I haven't seen any recent improvements in the cleaning protocol that would improve on the basic method that we use now.
Thank you.
I did earlier in the chat, I did put a reference to the Jessup et al. Paper, which is a paper that did look at some of the different cleaning techniques, as Randy was mentioning, where we were looking at different temperatures, water, different concentrations of soap, but then also immediately after wash, putting them into softened fresh water versus unsoftened versus hard versus salt. Some of those techniques, we were able to look at some different things depending on the capabilities of the facility itself. So that would be a good one. As Randy was saying, though, a lot of the information that we need to be able to move these forward does rely on oiled animals in a realistic scenario. In California, we did have one sea otter that Olive the otter that did come in, and we did follow and use some of our modified protocols too, and learned quite a bit on that. And that's also referenced in that one paper as well, as far as some of the things there. But a lot of the basic husbandry related, you know, the importance of blood values, some of the clinical chemistry results, etc. It's, as Randy said, it's basic physiology. And so following that and making sure that we understand that and addressing imbalances is kind of key.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. And looks like we have a hand up. Robert, I'm gonna unmute you here. Robert, can you hear us?
Perhaps not.
Looks like you're unmuted on our end, but let's see. Feel free to unmute yourself if you're able, and if not, type your question in the chat, and we will be sure to bring it up. Looks like we got a question in the audience. Someone posted in the chat asking if it would be possible to add a list of references given during today's workshop to the website. Yes, we will do our best to pull those and compile them to include on the website. And for you panelists, it'd be great if you could email those to me so I could get that done.
Dave, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Are you interested and would you be willing to put PDFs out to the folks if they were made available to you?
Yeah, I think we could do that as long as there's no copyright issues involved. But yeah, we could probably facilitate that.
Okay.
Great. Did that question from Robert? Oh, there is.
Oh, great. Thank you, Robert. Robert mentioned that from a plan holder perspective, this workshop's been informative, and we do appreciate that. We're certainly a target audience for this workshop, so I'm glad you found it helpful.
Great. Any more questions? We're starting to slow down.
Let's see. Greg Buey. So WAC 173-182, planning standards for wildlife response, puts obligations on plan holders. In the case of a mystery oil or a situation where the plan holder doesn't act, the Washington State Agency will tactically execute the requirements of 173-182-540. So Don, you go ahead if you were about to chime in.
Oh, was gonna see if Linda was still on, but if you want to take it, David, yeah.
So
It
while
seems like
just
more of a
warming up,
statement. Okay.
Yeah, so this, in the event of a large scale oil spill, multiple state agencies will respond together to ensure that the oiled wildlife aspect of the response is addressed. And with those state agencies, of course, there'll be federal agencies as well that'll come into unified command, along with the responsible party and any local tribal members that are interested in the response as well. So between the Department of Ecology, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and other resource agencies, we will ensure that there is a wildlife response. One more question here. Can you repeat the date of the training session in December? Also, will it be recorded for future use? My organization has access to a lot of volunteers. I would love them to get trained on the response.
That's yours, David.
So Aaron, December 4th is the training. It's a Saturday. We will push out information on registering for it in the very near future, within the next few weeks. It will not be recorded because it is, in addition to a volunteer training, it's also an 8-hour HAZWOPER refresher. So we require people to participate in the presentations and the training to achieve that 8-hour refresher. So it is free though. So I would certainly pass the word around to your organization, because yeah, they can get that 8-hour refresher and get some more information on how to become an oiled wildlife volunteer in the Pacific Northwest.
Great. So,
one more question here. Can any of the panel members direct toward any information on the effects of oil spills on invertebrate species?
Alan Mearns, are you still around? Maybe not. He's one of the experts, I think, in that area.
I'll just jump in really quickly. This is Tracy.
Oh, Tracy, yes. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
I
sir.
mean, we published a review on the effects of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in just hundreds of papers that came out since then. So there's tons and tons of information. In general, invertebrates can be very sensitive, or they can be really insensitive. That doesn't help a lot. So sorry.
Thanks, Dr. Collier. Any other questions there, David?
Yeah, I got a few more here. So regarding just general marine mammals, how oiled does an animal have to be in order to be considered ready for capture or treatment? And what is it that determines the success is not likely?
I'll just stab at that if you want, Don.
Sure, go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, it really depends on the species. If we're talking about pinnipeds and we have a mom pup pair where maybe that pup is still nursing, ingestion may be more of an issue for that animal, but we also wouldn't want to cause a separation. So it kind of depends on the specific situation. If we've got a population where we have weaned pups that are impacted, and those animals can be brought in for cleaning and stabilization, that's one thing. If we're talking about a cetacean, obviously we're not going to be bringing in large whales of any sort. But if we do have young cetacean strand that are still dependent then those decisions are going to be made kind of on a case-by-case basis, depending on the condition of that individual animal. So there's lots of different scenarios and situations that may present themselves, and we try to address those in the Northwest Area Contingency Plan. We try to break it down by species of some of the things we'll be thinking about for consideration.
Thanks, Kristen. You have any more questions there, David?
Yeah. So this one's for those presenters towards the end of the workshop. Do all of the organizations who track and monitor whale occurrences have a 24/7 response posture? And what would it look like if a spill happened today? Which organizations would be able to provide location information, and who would be able to be there on scene first, and who would might take longer to arrive?
Hi, Susan. Do you want to take that?
Sure. Orca Network is usually pretty much 24/7. We are underfunded at this point and a little understaffed, but we all are, work out of our home offices and via cell phones, and our hotline goes directly to our staff and to us. And we, those I know at NOAA who have my direct cell phone number, we respond pretty much day and night.
Great. Yes, thank you. Yeah, you're one of the first places we go to. And then Aaron Gless, would you like to contribute as well?
Yeah, so as far as whale watchers being on the water, I was going to say it kind of depends on the time of year. If you're reaching us, spring, summer, fall, we'll probably have a presence on the water, I'd say from about 10 in the morning till at least probably 5 or 6 in the afternoon. A little bit longer in the summer, maybe 10 to 7 or 8 with the longer days. But winter is tough. A lot of companies aren't running, I would say, past November. So November, December, January, February are usually maybe just, a couple of companies on a fair weather day. So winter is a little bit trickier, but most of the year we're going to have a pretty good presence, at least as far as daylight hours go.
Thanks, Aaron. Is Scott still on? Scott?
Sure, Don.
Yeah, that's the hydrophone network. That's one of the advantages. It can be 24/7. Maybe you can tell us more about that, please.
Sure, yeah. The 3 locations that OrcaSound currently coordinates, with a couple more coming, I hope, are cabled, and they're powered from shore and connected to the internet. So that's one of the main reasons we use the cabled versions of underwater microphones instead of an autonomous one that you would put in and record for a period and then do some post-processing and analysis. So yeah, with a few caveats like Susan's, that we could use more support, and we're down to 1 hydrophone at Port Townsend when we like to have 2. I think we've done an excellent job of providing 24/7 monitoring. During the day when we're coordinated with the sighting networks, we're not missing transits anymore because we're all cooperating, at least in Puget Sound proper. And so that's the potential I see, is better coordination during the daytime. And I see Dave Baines on the call today. There's no question that the last year, when we've had a increasingly reliable machine learning model listening in concert with humans in different time zones around the planet, we're still getting false positives. So we have to make sure that we don't annoy you by telling you we're hearing whales when we're not. But when there are whales calling, we're not missing them very often anymore, even in the middle of the night.
That's great. Yeah. So that's a 24/7 capability, and we would love to see you guys enhance as well. Thank you very much. All right, David.
Great. So this next one's for the wildlife response service providers out there. And so the question is, when are the WRSPs or the wildlife response service providers called out, and how quickly could they arrive on scene?
See, Mike, you're a WSRP, right? And or if Linda's on, she can talk about that, I think.
Well, I think Michelle Belize and Jenny Schleeps are also on too.
Oh, yes. Okay, Jenny. Yeah.
But we do have some contract staff, even though we're a program that's based in California, we do have some staff that's in the greater Pacific Northwest area. And one of the programs out of UC Davis is actually CDOC Society as well. So through local individuals that we work with, Kirk Klompner in the Astoria area, and then CDOC and some of our colleagues, we can be on scene rapidly with a small number of individuals, then with additional people coming up by air, and also bringing equipment up as necessary. I'm not sure about the other service providers that are on.
That's good. Is there any other service? Jenny, you want to comment, or is Barbara or anybody from the National Bird Rescue?
Hi, it's Michelle from International Bird Rescue. And much like Randy and Mike, oops.
You're good. You're good.
Thank you. Sorry, I got sidetracked by that sign. While we're based in California, we do have responders in the area in Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and British Columbia that are able to respond very quickly.
Thanks, Michelle. And Dr. Davis, did you want to ask?
We could respond very quickly, but we would do so under the through IBR. Since they have a Washington presence, we would be working under their umbrella state authorization, but we can be there. We can provide advice and management pretty quickly. We don't have equipment, though. We can help things get organized, but and we can do so relatively quickly in 24 to 48 hours.
Thank you. And we'll work on that equipment thing on our end. Thanks.
Great. I'll just add that the new requirements that the WRSPs fall under in Washington, there are some timed deadline requirements, including the requirement of the WRSP to begin mobilization within 2 hours of the notification. So they are committed to that. And Jenny concurs. Thank you, Jenny.
Thanks, David. All right, so we got any other questions?
Yeah, a few more here. So regarding a population's recovery potential, how long would it take for a heavily impacted population of X animal to recover? Are there certain thresholds where recovery would not occur? And then, of course, this varies by species, but feel free to answer with your pick.
I think, well, I know a number of people could do that, but I think I'll give it a little try first. As you stated, it depends on the species. You know, how long they are, what their reproductive rate is, all those different things. You know, sea otters were extinct in Washington until 1967 when they were reintroduced. And it's taken 40, 50, almost 50 years now to get their population back up to state threatened. So it can take decades for recovery of these populations. And in some cases, like we're worried about the southern resident killer whales in particular. The population level is at around 74 right now. If there was an oil spill, say in Harrow Strait, and it was an actual time when the superpod was formed up there, and a significant number of those animals were impacted, particularly the reproductive age females, that one event could possibly take that whole population to a situation where it would be very unlikely to recover. That's my first take at it. If anybody else would like to add into that, please feel free.
Historically, sea otter populations in various parts of Alaska have shown pretty remarkable recovery rates, up to as high as 20%. California is a completely different situation. There, the recovery rates have been quite variable, around 5%, and there are many reasons for that. But they can recover relatively quickly depending on the habitat, and we do have some case histories for otters growing at relatively rapid rates, but it's going to depend on regional resources. So.
Great, thank you, Dr. Davis. All right, David, do we have anything?
Yeah, thanks, Don. Looks like we have one final question here. Again, for all panelists. So can the effects of an oil spill be exacerbated by other more chronic stressors like sound pollution, urban runoff, or even climate change?
Does everyone all together want to just say yes?
Happy to go together and say that.
Yeah, I say yes to that.
I say yes to that.
I'll say yes, but quantifying it is challenging.
Yeah, amen is appropriate there.
Yeah.
I mean, a perfect example of that is the last two major oil spills we've had where marine mammals were affected, happened in the middle of an unusual mortality event. So how you tease apart the environmental effects and infectious agent effects combined with oil, how you tease those apart, ultimately there's morbidity and mortality associated with it. So I think we're going to see more and more of comorbidities in these situations.
And Mike, can you remind me that unusual mortality event, that was due to the warm blob that we saw back in like 2015, 2016 timeframe, right?
I think that definitely added to it as far as the number of California sea lions that were coming ashore.
Yeah, that was a really tough year. I was down in California. We were seeing dead sea lion pups everywhere, unfortunately. So yeah, the prevalence of warm water is definitely having an effect. I mean, the species are moving, their prey is moving. So yeah, there's a lot of change happening, and that warm blob for a few years off the California coast was just devastating.
Thanks. All right, so David, I think let's see. So I think we're about ready to wrap up. I think Matt Bissell, I think you can introduce our sponsors for our wrap-up statement here.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Yeah, just before we pass it off, just huge thanks to all the speakers, all the panelists. Just what an incredible day. So thank you all for taking the time to put those presentations together and be here today. Just blown away with the participation too today. It's really encouraging to see just how much interest is in this topic. I think Susan Berta with the Orca Network had a pretty good quote, just saying, you know, the more you learn about something, the more likely you are to protect it. And so I think we all definitely learned a lot today. And every presentation and this workshop as a whole, you know, we're steps along the path to preparedness, which brings us to Sarah Wilkins' great quote from her presentation this morning. you know, when you think you're prepared, keep trying, because you can always be more prepared. So yeah, we really are truly excited to see kind of where we are with all of this stuff in 5 years. And yeah, we look forward to working with you guys all along the way. Before we close it out, we'd like to pass it over to the sponsors of today's event, Centerline Logistics, Shell, and ConocoPhillips Polar Tankers. So if you guys can unmute yourselves and.
Yeah, this is Bowman Harvey with Centerline Logistics. The presenters, I mean, what a ton of insight into what we do and kind of fleshed out what we drill for and what it would look like in real time. So it was great to see all that today. As always, thank you for Ecology for putting this together and kind of driving the bus on this one. All the hard work that went into this was, you know, without sounding corny, it was kind of inspiring. So just happy that we were able to participate in this and be involved from start to finish. So yeah, thank you.
Hi, this is Brett Lowe with Polar Tankers. I'm the Director of Emergency Response. Polar Tankers appreciates the opportunity provided by the Department of Ecology to be a sponsor for this marine mammal workshop. We know exactly how difficult it is to orchestrate and coordinate such a broad virtual event. And so we thank you for that, the time that you've taken to include that. Also, we want to thank those that coordinated, presented, and participated in this workshop to make it such a success. I hope that there has been some benefit for each of you along the way, that you've been able to pull some grains or maybe some big chunks of information as you've listened today. And Confucius said, "What I hear, I forget. What I see, I may remember. But what I do, I understand." And Polar Tankers hopes that as we continue to be a united front, that we find ways to utilize the information provided today to make it what we do, so we can help others understand why we do what we do. Once again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your participation, and we look forward to hopefully being able to do something like this again in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. This is Chrissy Pohl with ConocoPhillips. Just figured I'd jump on along with Polar Tankers. I'm up in Alaska as the biological sciences coordinator, and nice to see some old names and familiar faces today. Lots of new ones. Thanks for the Pacific Northwest communal sharing, and happy to be a part of the discussions today.
And Victoria Brajevich Shell, just want to thank everybody again. It was absolute honor to be a part of this process, and I learned so much today, and I had about 15 Shell colleagues attending, and I'm very grateful that you recorded the session. We are going to post it on our website internally, so it can be accessed by 200 more folks that we have Environmental Network. And I really hope we'll continue this type of workshops, because I think that's a great learning opportunity, and especially if we record it, it can be accessed by hundreds of people. So great job, everybody. I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys so much. Those are great closing remarks. And that does it, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and hope you enjoyed it.